So now that we can sign the user in all the way to the game service, let's sign them out as well. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial and, to help debugging, I'm going to put this as a button on the front page. Realistically, I don't think you'd want to do this. Sign out, you probably want to keep more like hidden menu option somewhere. My hunch is it's going to be fairly uncommon for an actual user to want to sign out from Play Games once they've signed in. No one's going to say, I'd really like to stop earning achievement progress now. However, it does make your life easier for testing against both sort of the signed in and signed out state. So let's do that. I'm going to switch over to my nib. And quite possibly for the reasons I just stated, there is no official artwork for Google Plus sign out button. However, I did include some with the artwork zip file that we're going to use. So first things first, I'm going to add a button onto the screen here. This is going to be a custom button with no text. And I have notice we have a whole lot more images now. That's thanks to the Play Game Services bundle that we've added to our project. And here's our sign out. And we're just going to keep this for all of our states. All right. Next, let's open up our assistant editor. And I'm going to control drag to add an IB outlet. And we're going to call this sign out button. And then let's say underneath my sign in button was pressed method, I will add a sign out button was pressed method. Now let's fill this out. You might think, gosh, since we signed in through GPP sign in, we could sign out through GPP sign in. And indeed, there is a sign out method. However, we're not going to do that here. And that's because there is no equivalent finished with auth handler for signing out. And you'll end up in this weird state where you'll have signed out from your GPP sign-in object, but your GPG manager, the Google Play Games manager, has no idea that you've signed out. It still might try to access the cache data and might try to submit scores and achievements without realizing until later that something is wrong. So we're not going to do this. And instead, we're going to call GPG Manager Shared Instance sign out. And this method will do a number of things. One, the GPG Manager will talk to GPP sign in shared instance and call sign out on that. In addition, it will clear out any cache data that it's stored on behalf of the user and perform some additional cleanup tasks. So this is really the right way to sign out. We can try this and see what happens. Whoops, looks like my sign in button is off screen, or my sign out button is off screen, and that's because I forgot to go back in here and adjust my auto sizing to make sure that it is anchored to the bottom instead of the top. Sorry about that. And yes, I suppose I should really be starting to use auto layout and constraints here. I just haven't gotten used to it yet. Anyway. With that out of the way, let's run it. There we go. There's our buttons. So I'm already signed in, as you can see in our NS log. And now I'm going to sign out. And actually nothing happens, but I am actually signed out because if I sign in again, it will take me back to the OAuth 2.0 permission screen. Because I have signed out, the service says, okay, if you want to sign in again, we are going to double check and confirm rather than sign you in silently, which is the right behavior. So I'm going to go back and click accept. I'm going to go back in, and it looks like I'm signed in again. So this is nice. However, your typical user is not going to be able to look at their console log to figure out whether they're signed in or signed out. So let's add one more refinement, which is hiding or showing the appropriate buttons based on your signed in status. So I'm going to stop this, and we're going to go into my intro view controller.m file. And let's create another method. I'm going to put it up here, called refresh interface based on sign-in. Because I like long method names. The first question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we know if the user is signed in or not? One way, I suppose, to do it would be to set up a instance variable, and perhaps in my finished with auth handler, I could set this to true or yes, and then to sign out, I could set it to no. Turns out we can also get this information by asking the GPG manager. And the way you do this is we create a little bool, signed in, equals GPG manager, shared instance, has authorizer. And this is essentially a way of asking, is the user signed in? The engineer who has written this method would like me to let you know that technically it's really a method that determines whether the library sees an auth object associated with this user. It doesn't actually confirm that this auth object is valid or not, but for all intents and purposes, this is a good way to find out if the user is signed in. And then we can simply hide or show buttons based on this. So we're going to call our self.signin button. We'll hide this if the user is signed in. And our sign out button, we will not set to not if the user is signed in. In addition, let's change that label where we tell the user to sign in. Probably don't need to tell them that if they're already signed in. So if signed in, self.signinLabel.text equals welcome player. Otherwise, and this is where we can tell them sign in for achievements and leaderboards. All right, now we just have to call this method at the appropriate moments. Turns out there are 3 places where we want to call this method. The first would be in finished with auth after we've called sign in to Google Play Games. It would also be appropriate to put this at the end of our sign into Google Play Games method. Either one works. Next, we're going to want to do it on sign out was pressed. Remember that signing out does not hit our finished with auth error handler, so we'll also want to make sure we call it here. And then finally, we do want to call it in view will appear. This last call is nice to have in something like this where you've got your views inside a navigation controller and maybe you're switching back and forth between different views. When this view is ready to come up again, it's good to make sure that all the interface elements are as they should be based on the user's sign-in status. So let's try this now. And this time we have a little welcome player message. The sign-in button is hidden, and the sign out button is the only one that's available. If I click sign out, nearly immediately the sign out button goes away, the sign in button is back, I get back the prompt again to sign in for leaderboards and achievements. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to accept, and we're back. So now that this is done, I can go back into my nib file, and I'm going to move my sign out button right on top of my sign in button, since only one of them will ever be visible at any time. So there you go. We're now properly changing the look of the interface depending on whether or not the user has signed in to play games. So this is great. There are a couple more refinements that I would like to make, and we'll handle those in the next lesson. Stay tuned.